The Chernobyl disaster. On April 26th of 1986, a nuclear reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine had exploded during a safety test. At the moment, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. The explosion released large amounts of radioactive waste materials onto the environment. Thousands of people were forced to leave their homes. The areas nearby also became uninhabitable. The disaster exposed where the Soviet technology was lacking, and it increased major criticism on the Soviet government. The World Health Organization asserts that up to 116,000 people were forced to evacuate their homes due to the nuclear accident. Immediately, two workers died on site. 28 emergency workers died due to contact. As you know, they would go into the power plant, help rescue people or help people nearby, and due to the contact they died. And it is estimated that there were up to 4,000 casualties slash deaths. Hello, my name is Antonio Andino, and this is my three topics about the 1980s and the 1990s project. I try to pick topics which I have heard about before or was just a little familiar about, and projects that I thought were very interesting. For example, the Chernobyl disaster. Last year in my environmental class, my environmental science class, we had kind of touched upon this because it was the end of the year and we had run out of topics to talk about, or more like she wasn't assigning more work. And so she put on the Chernobyl movie. It was very great, and I learned a lot. It was very detailed about what happened, and I thought it was very interesting to learn. And I already knew just a little bit about it, so when I saw it in the topic list, I had put it. Second, we had learned about the Berlin Wall and its connection to the Cold War earlier this year in history. And since I already knew a little bit about it, it was very obvious I had to put it in my notes. As well as we had touched upon the Soviet Union and communism earlier in the year, and I had made a poster about it. I've already learned a little facts about it, so it was just very easy. I put it in my notes as well. And then the Rwanda genocide, very interesting. I have a friend, his name is Root, and his parents are refugees from the Rwanda genocide, and their first accounts of what had happened and why they took refuge. And I've heard their story, and I think it's a very, very interesting piece of history. I had to put it in my notes because I've heard the story, so it's something that I could connect to personally. I really liked it. I've never heard about the Tiananmen Square protest and the Gulf War, but I thought they were interesting and I put them down in my notes. So those are my six topics. We're gonna touch upon them in just a few seconds. Thank you guys. The fall of the Berlin Wall. Another major event of the 1980s. The Berlin Wall in 1989 had finally fallen since being built in 1961. The wall was built to separate the East and West Berlin. This was due to political differences. The East was being controlled by a communist government, while on the other hand, the West was a democratic government. After demanding freedom on November 9th of 1989, the wall was open to all citizens. The fall of the wall had symbolized the end of the Cold War. This moment was celebrated by both sides of the wall, as it was originally built to stop people from leaving communist Germany. The wall had separated communities, friends, and families for nearly 28 years. Terrible. Another event from the 1980s was the Tiananmen Square protest. The protest began in 1989 after the death of Hu Yaobang, who supported political reform and was more open to criticism and free discussion. His death became a rallying point for China. Many students decided to rally at the Tiananmen Square in Beijing to protest political reform, freedom of speech, and greater government accountability. The protest had lasted for several weeks and had even attracted international attention. It is important to know that these protests were not to overthrow the government, but to bring greater change. Regardless of that fact, in June of 1989, the government declared martial law, and estimates by History.com state that several thousand people died. The collapse of the Soviet Union. This was one of the most important events of the 1990s. The Soviet Union had been one of the world's superpowers during the Cold War. However, during a long course of political reforms, economic problems, and many independent movements, the country weakened and eventually collapsed. In December of 1991, the Soviet Union eventually dissolved into 15 smaller nations, with Russia being the largest successor. Mikhail Gorbachev had introduced two major reform programs. He was the leader of the Soviet Union right before it had fallen. These these allowed citizens to speak more freely, which revealed years of long hidden problems, which became the pushing point for independence. In turn, even communists to turn on him, which turned into a coup, which failed and declared the independence of 15 nations. One of the most tragic events of the 1990s was the Rwanda genocide. In 1994, tensions between the two ethnic groups in Rwanda, the Hulus and the Tutsis, led to a massive killing campaign. In the span of 100 days, an estimate of 800,000 people were killed. The genocide had revealed the dangers of ethnic hatred and political violence. This hatred happened because under Belgium colonial rule, the Tutsis were favored for administrative positions, which infuriated and created tensions between the Hutus and the Tutsis. According to the United Nations, as the Tutsis and Hutus shared the same traditions, cultures, and communities, they never shared hatred for each other at first. It was only after the Belgium and Germany rule. Propaganda became a vital point for the genocides, and is what fueled so much anger and hatred into wanting to kill so much people in Rwanda. The final topic I will discuss is the Gulf War. In 1990, Iraq had invaded the neighboring country, Kuwait. In response, a coalition of countries led by the United States was formed to force Iraq out of Kuwait. The war began in January of 1991 and only lasted a couple of weeks. The coalition successfully forced Iraq out of Kuwait, and this would demonstrate just the immense power of international forces and cooperation and modern technology. In conclusion, these six events shaped the modern world. In many ways, the Chernobyl disaster revealed the dangers of nuclear accidents. The fall of the Berlin Wall had ended the division in Europe. The Tiananmen Square protests highlighted the struggle for political freedom. The collapse of the Soviet Union symbolized the end of the Cold War. The Rwanda genocide showed the devastating effects of ethnic violence. And finally, the Gulf War demonstrated the impact of how international cooperation responding to aggression, how strong they could work. And together, these events help us understand major political, social, and military changes that occurred in the 1980s through the 1990s. Thank you for listening.